Triplex Acies. In the Roman army, victory wasn't just about brute strength. They used a deadly pattern to bring the enemy army to its knees, a brutal tactic that turned battle into a staged massacre. In the 3rd century BC, the Roman army used a three-line formation called the Triplex Acies. The Romans placed their main force in 3 lines behind each other. Each line entered the fight at a different stage of the battle. The first line was made up of the hastati, who were usually younger soldiers. They were the first main force to engage the enemy. Behind them were the principes, more experienced troops ready to step in if the first line's attack stalled. The third line was formed by the triarii, veterans kept as the final reserve. They only entered the fight in serious situations. One important feature of this tactic was the way units were positioned. The maniples weren't lined up as one solid wall. There were gaps between them, giving the whole formation a checkerboard-like pattern. This structure allowed the troops to move more easily and be more flexible on rough terrain. Before the main forces clashed, lightly armed infantry called velites moved ahead of the formation. They approached the enemy, threw their light javelins, and tried to disrupt the order of the opposing ranks. Then, they pulled back to clear the way for the hastati. The hastati started the main battle. And if they couldn't break the enemy line, they had the option to fall back. At that point, the principes from the second line kept up the pressure. The enemy, having already used up some of their strength in the first clash, now faced fresher troops. If the situation remained critical, the triarii entered the field as the last line. Testudo. In the Roman army, sometimes defense was the most aggressive move. With this tactic, they turned themselves into an impenetrable mobile fortress, a steel turtle that no arrow could pierce. In the 1st century BC, the Testudo formation became one of the most famous defensive methods of the Roman army. Roman soldiers had to advance toward enemy positions under a hail of arrows. The main goal of the Testudo wasn't to attack the enemy directly. It was to get a group of soldiers to a specific point with as few casualties as possible. To form the Testudo, soldiers gathered together in a tight group. The soldiers in the front row held their shields facing the enemy. Soldiers on the sides held their shields outward, and those inside the formation held their shields over their heads. As a result, the shields created an almost continuous cover at the front, sides, and top of the group. Once the formation was complete, the soldiers had to move at a coordinated speed. If one part moved too fast or too slow, gaps would open between the shields, and enemy archers could strike through those gaps. That's why the Testudo required a lot of discipline and coordination. This method was especially useful in sieges, where soldiers had to cross open ground and reach the base of an enemy wall or gate. However, the Testudo had a major limitation. The tight formation slowed down movement significantly. If the enemy attacked from multiple directions or cavalry reached the formation, keeping it together became nearly impossible. Circumvallation and Contravallation. How could you surround the enemy and fight off a siege at the same time? Caesar's engineering masterpiece that forced the enemy to surrender. In 52 BC, Vercingetorix's forces were trapped inside the fortified city of Lilia. But at the same time, a massive relief army from the Gallic tribes was approaching. If the Romans only faced the city, the relief army could hit them from behind. Caesar used 2 lines of fortifications at the same time, called Circumvallation and Contravallation. First, the Romans built an inner ring of fortifications facing inward to stop the forces inside Lilia from escaping. This line included ditches, ramparts, defensive walls, watchtowers, and various obstacles. Then, as the relief army got closer, a second line was built on the outside, facing the opposite direction. This time, the goal was to stop outside forces from breaking in and protect the besieging army from an attack from the rear. As a result, the Roman army was essentially fighting on 2 fronts. Towers and ditches slowed down the attackers before they could even reach the main lines. The 2 rings of fortifications controlled the battlefield and allowed the Romans to keep up the siege and resist the relief army at the same time. In the end, the outside forces failed to break through, and Vercingetorix surrendered after the relief army was defeated. Siege ramp. The fortress of Masada, perched on a vertical cliff, was a nightmare for the Romans. But the Roman general used his ingenuity to bring the war to the gates of heaven. In 73 AD, during the siege of Masada, the Roman army faced a fortress that sat atop a high, nearly unreachable cliff. The Jewish defenders were positioned at the top of this height, and the fortress walls allowed them to control all approaches. A direct assault up the steep slopes could have cost the Romans heavy casualties. On the western side of Masada, where a natural ridge brought the ground closer to the fortress heights, the Romans began building a massive ramp. Soldiers and laborers used various materials to gradually extend this sloped path toward the walls above the cliff. The goal was to reduce the height difference so heavy siege equipment could be brought close to the enemy's fortifications. After the main part of the ramp was completed, the Romans moved their siege equipment up along it, and the Roman forces were able to attack the fortifications from very close range. Corvus. How did the Romans turn a naval battle into hand-to-hand combat on land, the weapon that decided the fate of the Punic Wars at sea? In 260 BC, during the First Punic War, the Romans had plenty of experience in land battles, but at sea, they had to fight Carthage, a power with a more experienced fleet and sailors. In naval battles of that era, skill in maneuvering ship and ramming the enemy's hull was crucial, and that played right into Carthage's hands. To reduce this advantage, the Romans invented a device called the Corvus. The Corvus was a narrow, long, movable bridge placed on the deck of a Roman ship. At its end was a heavy iron spike. When the enemy ship got close enough, the Romans would drop the bridge onto their deck. The iron spike would pierce into the enemy's deck, locking the two ships together. From that point on, the enemy ship couldn't easily pull away. Once the ships were connected, Roman soldiers crossed the Corvus and stormed directly onto the enemy deck. In this way, a battle that was supposed to be decided by naval maneuvers turned into close-quarter fighting between soldiers. However, the Corvus had its limits too. The weight of the structure could make the ship less stable. Pilum Volley. Before the battle even started, Roman legionaries disarmed the enemy with a simple trick, a weapon that turned the enemy's shield into a heavy, useless burden. In the 2nd century BC, when the Roman lines got close to the enemy, the legionaries would throw their pila from the right distance. The pilum was a heavy javelin with a long, narrow iron tip designed to pierce through shields or bodies. If the pilum stuck into a shield, its weight could make it hard to move or use. The enemy soldier would sometimes be forced to drop the weighted shield and keep fighting without full protection, even when the projectile didn't cause many direct casualties. The simultaneous impact of a volley of pila could still disrupt the front line's order. After this throw, the Roman forces closed the remaining distance and engaged in close combat. Timing at this stage was crucial. The goal was to put pressure on the enemy before they could pull out the pila, rearrange their shields, or reform their lines. The legionaries advanced behind their large shields, and at close range, they used their swords. Lilia, Cippi, and Stimuli. Julius Caesar prepared a battlefield where stepping on the ground was more deadly than facing a sword. In 52 BC, during the siege of Alesia, Julius Caesar's army set up a series of hidden traps and obstacles in the ground in front of their fortifications. The goal was to stop the Gallic forces from charging in with speed and cohesion before they even reached the Roman walls and main lines. 3 important types of these obstacles were known as Cippi, Lilia, and Stimuli. Cippi were made from thick, sharpened branches planted in pits in the ground, with their pointed ends sticking upward. These obstacles were placed in dense rows. Attackers charging forward would suddenly run into a network of wooden traps and be forced to stop or change direction. Behind or between these obstacles were the Lilia. Lilia were small, deep pits, dug in a funnel shape, with a sharp wooden stake or spike placed in the center of each one. The top of the pit was covered with branches and light material to make it look like normal ground from a distance. These pits were built in several rows. The stimuli were sharp metal spikes driven into the ground, with only their tips showing. Their main purpose was to wound the feet and slow down soldiers trying to get through the obstacles. The strength of this tactic was in combining these layers. Attackers first ran into hidden barriers, then got trapped among the pits and spikes, and all the while they were under fire from Roman defenders. Field artillery. In the 1st century BC, weapons like the Scorpio could fire heavy bolts or projectiles from a distance, putting pressure on the enemy's formation and movement before close combat even began. These machines were placed in positions with a good line of sight over the enemy's approach routes. The crew would adjust the device, and then launch projectiles toward the dense ranks, advancing troops or key points in the enemy formation. The goal of this fire wasn't just to kill as many soldiers as possible. Even a limited number of heavy projectiles could disrupt the enemy's ranks, force soldiers to change direction. Once close combat began, the role of these machines became more limited, because firing into an area where friendly and enemy troops were mixed together. Marching camp. Did you know that the Romans built hundreds of temporary cities during a single campaign? In the 2nd century BC, Roman legions on campaign would usually build a fortified camp at their stopping point after a day's march. The purpose of this system was to make sure the army didn't spend the night unprotected, even deep in enemy territory. Then, the soldiers would start building the surrounding fortifications. A ditch was dug around the perimeter, and the soil that was dug out was used to build a defensive rampart. Then wooden barriers or palisades were placed on top of the defensive sections to make it harder for the enemy to enter directly. Gates were set up at specific points. Inside the camp, tents and units were arranged according to a set order. The commander's location, different units, and pathways were all clearly defined. This repeated pattern meant that even when they reached a new area, soldiers wouldn't get confused about where to go. Guards were stationed at key points, and the entrances were kept under control. If the enemy attacked at night or during rest time, they first had to cross the ditch, rampart, and surrounding barriers. This delay gave the legionaries time to get out of their tents, grab their gear, and gather at their designated spots. As a result, a moving army could create a temporary defensive position every single night and continue their march again in the morning. If you like this content, click on subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about future videos.